The Defence Department is refusing to comment on claims an Afghan warlord gifted gold watches to Australian Special Forces commanders. Uruzgan's local police chief Matiulah Khan, who was killed in 2015, worked closely with coalition forces during the Afghanistan war. Former Special Operations Task Group soldiers have confirmed to the ABC Khan regularly awarded Swiss-made gold watches to senior Australian commanders. Defence won't say whether it was aware of the lavish gifts, but says policies are in place for the giving and receiving of such benefits. For more on this, we're joined now by John Blaxland, a defence expert from the Australian National University. Professor Blaxland, thank you so much for joining us on ABC News. Just firstly to begin with, who was Matiulah Khan?
Matiulah Khan was a very influential power broker in the province of Uruzgan, where the Australian forces were based for the better part of a decade. He was a key figure because he had his own militia, effectively, of about 2,000 troops that he could call on to help the Australian and Dutch forces in performing some of the function that needed to be performed in order to keep the force size down to a minimum. Essentially, he was instrumental in guaranteeing the safety of the logistics, resupply, food and all the other kind of essential equipment that needed to be trucked into Uruzgan province to the Tarankat base. And the route to that base, of course, was through what was known to be territory that the Taliban were happy to maraud through. And Matiulah Khan basically guaranteed to the Australian Defence Force and to the forces in Uruzgan the steady supply by the use of his force and by the use of his ability to co-opt people along the way. And that was essentially done in a way that Australians didn't really have to worry about it. Knowing that there was a shady element to Matiulah Khan, there was nonetheless a sense of this is a bit of a Faustian bargain, a deal that had to be struck to keep the footprint low and the prospects of casualties low as well.
So a key figure there, particularly for coalition forces. What do we know of his interactions with the Australian forces when they were operating in Afghanistan?
Look, he was a trusted figure. It's quite a controversial trusted figure too, because while we were there with the Dutch actually were not at all comfortable in working with Matiulah Khan, although Australian commanders, right to the very chief of the joint operations when visiting Afghanistan, would actually occasionally meet with him. And he was a very important interlocutor for Australia. As I say, he was extremely influential, but he was also seen to be somebody who, while appointed police chief under some pressure from Australia, from Australian elements in Uruzgan, he was known to be somebody who was quite happy to take a cut from the poppy crops and from other illegal activities in Uruzgan and in neighbouring provinces. So he's a really mixed bag, one that generated considerable unease for quite a number of people, but was somebody who was seen as a strong supporter of the international coalition, actively participated in fighting the Taliban and in pushing back in support of Australian operations. So a real mixed bag there.
So given the extent of his activities, what are the implications now of these revelations that Australian Special Forces senior soldiers were regularly given watches by Khan, said to be worth in around $1,000?
Now, in the grand scheme of things, that's not a huge amount of money. They're obviously nice, expensive watches. But when Australians engage cross-culturally, internationally, there are protocols for what can and cannot be done. Normally, Australian government employees are not allowed to accept gifts. That's established. But there are exceptional circumstances where it's kind of rude to say no and counterproductive in terms of the relationship building that they're trying to undertake. So in those circumstances, and there's pretty clear rules about how to do this, you can accept a gift, but you then have to make sure it goes onto a government registry and that the people in the chain of command and authority above you are fully briefed and they understand the predicament. The issue is that this is something that went on over quite some time. Matiulah Khan was the continuity guy. So, Australians would rotate in and out, work closely with him, and some of them would be given a watch as a reward. So I'm sure some of them reported. I don't know if all of them reported up the chain and kept their details on the registry. But it's also, the converse to this is that while you had to accept the gift, there was also a sense that you had to kind of at times wear it to be seen as appreciating Matiulah Khan's largesse. So this is another dimension to this, is that this is one way of him actually asserting his kind of power and authority by demonstrating to the locals in Uruzgan that, see, even the Australian soldiers are wearing my goods. Now, mine happens to be a nice Swiss watch too, not from Matiulah Khan. I'll have you know, I bought it myself. But nonetheless, there's a sense that, a bit of accoutrement on the sleeve is a powerful way of Matiulah Khan demonstrating to others in the province, I'm a big guy, I'm a powerful, influential guy. And he became quite influential and quite wealthy along the way. But of course, in doing so, he attracted quite a lot of enemies, and that, of course, led to his eventual undoing in 2015.
So, Professor Blackson, given what happened last year with Australia Post around the gifting of luxury watches, can we see a separation here in terms of the circumstances that we understand for the relationship that was being fostered between Australian forces and Matiulah Khan in Afghanistan? Or might we see this sort of situation unfold into a broader issue for the military?
I think we need to keep the two issues quite separate. The circumstances are different. The Cartier watches are between government employees and other government employees who are Australian citizens operating in Australia. That is quite a different set of circumstances to an Australian government official operating in another country cross-culturally in a set of circumstances where there is a degree of ambiguity, but nonetheless some definite benefit that potentially could accrue from Australian soldiers, Australian officials accepting the gift, putting it on the registry, and be seen to be wearing it for the sake of amity and cordial relations with Matiulah Khan. The question, though, is how many of those people who received such watches actually registered them on the official registry and passed up the word up the chain? Now that I don't have the answer to.
All right. Well, Professor John Blaxland with the Australian National University, wonderful to have your insights for our ABC News audiences. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Miriam.